Well, I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation, and guess where I learned how to do a PowerPoint? Map. So if I do anything wrong, it's Joe's fault. But anyway, so I'm really thankful to Mission Amish people and Joe that I was chosen to give a talk today, and so I tried to do a little bit of a funny video related to being chosen. But my wife looked at it and she said, "What, are you going to try to be funny?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. We'll see." So I hadn't done my PowerPoint then yet. So, but our pastor Jake, who's in the back there, he gave a lesson last week on Luke 6, where Jesus chose his disciples. And my immediate thought went to the other 40, 50, 60 disciples. He chose his apostles, actually. And how did they feel? Did they feel left out, that they weren't chosen as apostles? But then I'm a huge Cleveland Cavaliers fan. And so I thought about Kenny Atkinson at the time. And he chooses a starting five to start the game. But then he has a whole line of bench players that come off the bench, and they're very, very, very important to help win the game. And the same holds true for us as Christians. We're not apostles, but we can be bench players that are very, very, very important to win the game. So, okay, now the transitions, I did some really fancy transitions, but they're not on this, and that's totally fine. We'll get through it. Okay, I'm going to stand to the side here a little bit, and my name is Arlen Yoder, or Kansas Moses Red John's Arlen. My grandpa was from Kansas. In fact, Miriam Kime, who is Joe's sister-in-law, she's from Hutchinson, Kansas, and her brother is back there in the sound booth, and he was from Hutchinson, Kansas, and that's where my grandpa grew up. So I'm Kansas Moses Red John's Arlen. Whoops, got to point that way. There, okay. I'm going to be talking about my Amish and Mennonite heritage and how both helped to shape my life. I'm going to switch here a little bit. I'm going to do this. There we go. That's better. And the title of my talk today is Finding the Missing Piece, and it's P-E-A-C-E, not the other piece. It's Finding the Missing Piece. And I don't know how many people are from the Holmes County area, but in between Sugar Creek and Walnut Creek and Sugar Creek, there was a sign close to the Sharon Conservative Mennonite Church, and I don't know if they put it up or not, but they had the sign up, "No God, no peace, no God, no peace." Does anybody know if that sign is still up? I'm not sure, but it was up for many, many years as I was growing up. My theme verse is Romans 10:13, "For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." And I'm going to bring that up toward the end too. First of all, I'm going to share my Amish heritage. My dad grew up just north of Benton, Ohio, about 3 miles north of Benton, Ohio, on the Mose Yoder farm. There you can see a picture. Now that's a recent satellite picture. It didn't look exactly like that, but some of the things are still there. There's a picture of my dad as a young man and my dad as an older man. My dad left the Amish in 1940-ish because he had some health issues and some feet problems, and he was adventurous, and he loved traveling. He just loved traveling. And so he became a truck driver. And at my Uncle Bert's funeral back a few years back, an old Amish man with white hair came up to me and told me, he said, "Do you know your dad took us out to California?" He was just a kid at the time, took my family out to California, in 1940. I don't know. I think he said something about the World's Fair, but it's hard to believe that an Amish family would go to the World's Fair. And there's Dad as an older man. And if you can believe it, Dad in this picture is about 8 years younger than I am now. So, but he had some health issues, so. But he gave his heart to the Lord late in life, which is, I was glad that he gave his heart to the Lord, but sad that it took him so long. And two impactful things about my Amish heritage, and number one was that I had very infrequent visits with my Amish relatives. You have better things to do. You have to play ball, you have to watch TV, at the time, and we just didn't like to visit our Amish relatives. One thing that I can remember, that I distinctly remember, is like when we would be ready to leave, all my Amish cousins would surround our car, and they would be smiling in our car. Now, there was a communication barrier. That was the thing when we were little. There was a communication barrier. But I regret now that I didn't have more of a relationship with my cousins than I did. And then also not asking Dad questions about his Amish upbringing. How did Grandma feel when he left the Amish? We didn't talk about stuff like that. I don't know, if Amish people or former Amish people talk about stuff like that now or not. Now my mom, Dad married my mom, and she grew up in the Mennonite church, and she grew up in the Walnut Creek Mennonite church. That's where she attended. There's a picture of my mom as a young woman, and my mom as an older woman. And after Dad died, I lived with her for a few years before I went to college, but then she got cancer and died also in 1980. 87, because Dad died in 1980. There's a picture of my mom's family, and that's my grandpa Lee Miller and his wife Priscilla. They were my grandparents, and now I didn't know Lee because he died when I was just a half year old or so. And Grandma, she was really a lot thinner than that when I knew her. But my uncles on my mom's side were very successful. The one on the left became a business executive in New York City, and the one on the right, way on the right, Uncle Bob, he became a chemist, a really well-known chemist in Indiana. There is this Charm. So she was raised in Charm, Ohio. Many of you know where Charm, Ohio is, I'm assuming. And she was raised there in Charm. And that restaurant now, many of you are probably familiar with the restaurant, the Charm restaurant now. That was started as a store by my grandpa. And then my grandpa died, and then my Uncle Forrest took it over. And then my Uncle Ivan took it over after Uncle Forrest died, and he's the one that made the store into a restaurant. And I can remember many times, or sometimes, going in with Cousin Kenny into the store, and he would just grab stuff off the shelf. And there wasn't things like the bulk food market today where you have to keep strict inventory. He just would grab and give it to us, and it was kind of interesting. But Grandpa and Uncle Forrest made Charm Bologna. And I don't know if any of you remember Charm Bologna, probably not, but it was a competitor to Trail Bologna at the time. But it was made in the basement of the store. And Uncle Forrest got inspected, and he would have had to upgrade the basement of the store to keep making Charm Bologna. Now, there's a picture that I wanted to point out. If any of you know about Little Raymond's watch repair shop, this is the only picture I could find because it's no longer there. That's Little Raymond. He was a little Amish guy about that tall, and he fixed watches, pocket watches and regular watches. And I loved going into his shop with Dad, and he was just so friendly. You'd go in there, and he would know how to fix watches. He was an Amish guy, but he knew how to fix watches. And this is the only picture I could find. It's through the restaurant window. And a couple years ago, okay, I have a neighbor that lives a couple houses down from us in Mansfield, Ohio, and her daughter married into a former Amish family, and so she goes down to Holmes County a lot. And so one day she let us know that out on our front porch was this plate, and it was a plate commemorating Little Raymond's Watch Shop. It's really meaningful. And two impactful things about my Mennonite heritage. The one thing is Grandma talked frequently about dying, wanting to die to be with Grandpa. I just couldn't fathom that because I was always scared of dying. And she talked frequently about wanting to die to be with Grandpa again. And then secondly, Uncle Eddie and Aunt Mary were the only openly evangelical family members, and they invited me frequently to their house. We would go to their house to watch color TV because we had a black and white TV at the time. And they were just always open. Even after I became a Christian, they said, "You come and visit anytime." And that was really impactful for me that they did that. So now let's go to my home life in Freiburg, Ohio. I grew up, the first few years of my life, I grew up in Freiburg, Ohio. And here's a picture of the home. Some of you might know where that is. It's now torn down, but my dad built that house, and it was right there. And there's a picture of Dad's truck garage in Freiburg, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And there is that was my mom's wash house. She had to walk out to the wash house to wash clothing. So, two impactful things about living in Freiburg. Number one, Harry Weaver bought the Freiburg home when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So, any of you know anything about Freiburg and you know about Weaver, you probably can surmise that's where Weaver leather started. And then, back. And then secondly, Paul Koblenz was murdered about 2 miles away from our Freiburg home. He was a young man that lived about 2 miles away from our Freiburg home there. I see somebody shaking their head there. Yeah, so he was murdered, and I can distinctly remember, well, let's move on first until we get to that. Okay, so that's my mom's wash house, but it was turned into Weaver Shoe Repair. So it was turned into Weaver Shoe Repair. And you can see on the side of it, I think Christ is the answer, is what he put on the side. He was conservative Mennonite. And then he moved his Weaver leather into what was my dad's truck garage. And then here it is now, Weaver leather, which is really a major factory making leather goods. So the murder in Amish, Ohio, Paul Koblenz lived in a basement house on the family farm, and he and his wife were in there, and there were two, vagabonds that came in from Illinois, and they came in wanting to make trouble. And so they entered the basement house on the family farm where the husband and wife lived, Paul and his wife, and they were trying to, I don't know exactly what happened there, but my understanding, I was 3 and a half at the time, okay, but I don't remember exactly what happened except that Paul Koblenz ran out the door to get help, and they shot him in the back. I think they shot him in the back, I'm not sure. But anyway, my dad kept clippings of this for years and years and years. But the one thing I remember is that we went to the calling hours. Me as a 3.5-year-old went to calling hours there, and the thing that I remember the most is I wasn't big enough, I don't think, to see in the coffin, but I can remember that Paul, just a young man, had red blotches on his face, and I don't know exactly why, if they were blood stains or what caused those red blotches, but that's one thing I remember as a 3.5-year-old. But even at that early age, I was aware of the missing piece. I didn't have peace in my life. My home life on the Charm Road. So my dad wanted to move closer to Berlin, so he built the the second house down on the Charm Road, and I have very many good memories of living on the Charm Road. You can see the basketball hoop on the barn. I spent many, many, many hours playing basketball, pretending I was an NBA star at that hoop. And then also we had a great big front yard, and we played a lot of baseball on that front yard. Two impactful things about living on the Charm Road. Number one, to play sports, I walked up to Berlin about 2 miles away frequently. And number two, the Brunk tent revivals on the Joel Miller farm. I don't know if any of you remember those Brunk, but I'll talk about those in a little bit. But I walked 2 miles many, many times to play sports, and that led me to become a Highland Hawk. But we weren't that good back then. We weren't as good as they are nowadays. They've won numerous state championships since I left, so it's amazing. And then the Brunk tent revivals. That one was a picture of one in 1959. This was on the road just across from our house, right in the field across from our house. And it was, Joel Miller was Amish, but he allowed the conservative Mennonite churches to hold the Brunk tent revivals in that field. And it was just really amazing, and it was really a big deal. A lot of people came to those tent revivals. And the thing that I can remember is across the field, we would be playing ball. We didn't go to them. You know, they were mostly attended by conservative Mennonite people. We didn't go to the tent revival, but we could hear them singing. And then if you've ever heard an evangelist, George Brunk had a deep evangelist voice, you know, sort of like Billy Graham. You know, they just have a presence about them when they speak. It's amazing. And we could hear that across the way. There's a picture of the tent. I don't think they had that big of a tent, you know, close to where I lived. So I lived a great life in the Freiburg and Charm Road, but I still felt little peace. My church life growing up in an Amish Mennonite community. There's the Martins Creek Mennonite Church. It's located about halfway in between Berlin and Benton or so, but that's where I attended growing up. We had sporadic attendance. My dad didn't attend church very much. He, you know, maybe 4, 5, 6 times a year he might attend. Mom and us children, we attended more of the church. And in 8th grade, I went through membership classes and baptism and became a member. So 2 impactful things about my church attendance. We had a torchbearers club and it was sort of like a Boy Scout club for Mennonites. So, and in the 8th grade, again, we went through, you know, I'll talk about that again, membership classes and baptism. And I had a real good and memorable times. We had a great torchbearers leader. He was a great guy, and I can still almost, we had a camp out on the hillside, and I can almost still taste and smell the morning breakfast. It was amazing. I can still almost, it was so good. But I had good and memorable times attending the Mennonite church, but still no real peace. Change ahead. The impact of my grandpa, Mose Yoder. Oh, there's a picture of my grandpa, Mose Yoder. I think he's probably in his 80s by this time. He ran the sawmill, and he was a hard worker and was a farmer. The one thing that they said is he lived in the Doughty house. Grandma died when I was about 8 years old, so I didn't know her real well, but I got to know Grandpa fairly well. I wish I had gotten to know him better. But anyway, they said that he read the Bible by lamplight. Many days they would go and visit, and he would be reading the Bible by lamplight. I don't know about his, you know, I never got to talk with him about his faith or anything like that. And then in 1975, Dad had some physical problems. My mom didn't drive, and so Dad wanted to move into Berlin, Ohio, right into Berlin, where Mom could walk to the post office or to the store. And so we had an auction, and right there in that barn, behind that one wall in the middle there, I tried to talk to my grandpa Yoder. by that time, Grandpa could hardly hear. He was 91 years old and he could barely hear. And I can remember how frustrated I felt not being able to communicate with my grandpa. It was just, I was upset that I couldn't communicate with him. And I was really becoming pretty distraught by this point, not knowing how to find the missing piece. So 2 years later, 1977, Grandpa died. And you can see the machinery shed there in the middle. That's where the funeral was held. And again, many of you know about the 3 preachers in an Amish service. I couldn't understand anything they said, pretty much. I could understand a little bit that they said, but not very much. But I was really missing something in my life at the time. And he was buried about 3 or 4 miles away in the Amish cemetery. There's a picture of his headstone there and Grandma. And after, I was really empty. I was really, really feeling empty by that point. It was amazing. I mean, it's just hard to explain. But I had a good job. I had a brand new Camaro that looked just about like that. The only thing about that one, it has a lot nicer tires than I had. I didn't have fancy tires like that. But that was my color. That was my Camaro. So I went driving all around East Holmes County for an hour, hour and a half, maybe more. And I was upset. I could not figure out what was happening in my life. I had missing piece in my life, and I couldn't figure out how to get it. And all of a sudden, I parked. And I can't even remember exactly where I parked. There, close to Benton, in between Benton and Freiburg, or someplace in there. But I called out to the Lord. I called out to the Lord there in my car. And there was no doubt in my mind, there's not a doubt, because God met me there in my car. He met me there in my car, and I cried and wept for a long, long time. And I ended up going back to the visitation hours. An Amish funeral, they usually have all-day visitation. I went back to the Amish funeral, a changed man. So I made this Roman road tract. I didn't do the painting or anything like that, but I made this Roman road tract. And again, we're going to reference Romans 10:13. The guy is in the middle of the road praying. He's calling out to God, for whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And that's what I did in my car. I finally found the missing piece. Why? Why did I call out to God on the day of Grandpa Yoder's funeral? I could never figure it out. I couldn't figure out what was the purpose. Did God have a plan with this? I couldn't figure it out. Was it due to my desire for my Amish relatives to also call on the name of the Lord as I did? And was God preparing me and my wife for our future involvement with mission to Amish people? That's what I wondered, I didn't know. So, meeting Joe and Perry Kime. Many of you know, there's Joe. He's a little bit younger there. He looks really good. But I met Joe and Perry Kime. There was a guy in my small group that was going through a divorce. And he was determined he was going to get a divorce because his wife was having an affair. And I said, well, let's just go to McDonald's and I just wanted to offer support. Now, the good news, to make a long story short, is that this man who was, he didn't get a divorce, but actually Johnny and Miriam and some of the kids were living on his property that he owned. They were renting his property. And then Perry, it turns out, had a construction shirt on, and we needed somebody to build a back porch onto the back of our garage. And so Perry agreed to come and give us a quote, and then he ended up coming and building a back sun porch onto the back of our garage. And then while he was there, he and his crew were there, I just asked him, hey, can I come to your Bible study? I was kind of missing out on my Amish and Mennonite heritage by that time. I was kind of missing out, and Perry said, sure, come on ahead. And so we met there at McDonald's and then a little time at Burger King, I think, with Joe leading it with about 6 or 8 young men, young former Amish men. We met there. And then I went home. It started getting big and bigger than it could, it didn't feel comfortable. I think they kicked you out, or they kicked us out of McDonald's or something because it was too much interruption or something. But I don't remember for sure, but I'm just guessing. But anyway, it went to Burger King. And then we lived about a mile away from that McDonald's in Mansfield. And then my wife, unbeknownst to me, she said, bring him here. Bring him here. Why don't you bring him here? So to make a long story short, we had a Bible study led by Joe and about 6 to 10 former Amish young men. And it was a really meaningful time for me and hopefully for those young men. I can see one that might have attended some. Back there, Benny, he attended. So there's a picture of the men's Bible study in the basement of our house. That was a really meaningful time. And lo and behold, we had 2 film crews in our house in 1 year. In 2012, we had 2 film crews. This is the PBS film crew there. And I really liked them. I liked them better than the National Geographic film crew. The National Geographic film crew came later, and they were following Mose Gingrich around. And so they filmed at our house as well there. So that was really kind of an exciting time for us. And there's our adopted family, former Amish family. They now call us Mom and Dad and Grandpa and Grandma. They're Rachel and Eli and the kids. And many of you know Chris and Wayne below. So they're longtime volunteers. That was our Christmas gathering this year. And my wife mentors a young lady. She's been mentoring a young lady for probably about, I imagine 4 or 5 years. And we've gone through a lot with her, this young lady. It's amazing. We've been through a lot. In fact, I'm getting together with her next week to look at her tax issues. And she's also written a couple of books, 2 of which are novels based on our relationship with former Amish and Mission to Amish people. She refers to Mission to Amish people in these 2 books. They're a series of books. Old Order Amish, New Order Amish. So she wrote those books, and she wrote a couple more books as well. And then I retired in 2019, if you can believe it. I retired in 2019 from almost 29 years working in mental health in Ashland, Ohio. And at my retirement party, I found out through my wife first and then Joe that he had an opening for a grant writer. And I had written grants in my previous job as a mental health worker. And so I got a job there. I was a contract worker. I didn't work very much. Joe probably wishes I would have worked more. But December of last year was my last time writing grants for Mission to Amish people. But it was a meaningful time for me, going up there and writing grants. Whoops. 2 impactful conclusions about my long journey growing up with an Amish and Mennonite heritage. Number 1, I love my Amish and Mennonite heritage and my Amish and Mennonite relatives. I love them, And I think you probably all expect a but here. But my Amish and Mennonite heritage, or any religion or heritage for that matter, in and of themselves will not get anyone to heaven. It will not get anyone to heaven. I learned that when I was in the 8th grade. I went through the membership classes. I was a bona fide Mennonite, and I wasn't saved at the time. So going back to the theme verse, Romans 10:13, for whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. So that's the only way to be saved, to recognize your sins and realize that you need a Savior to save you from your sins and that his blood covers us from our sins. That's the only way to be saved. So, and that's the only way of finding the missing piece. And that's all I have. Thank you.
It was telling me, climb out of the boat, take a walk on the waves, some places you'll never go, till you step out on faith. Don't fear the wind or the rain. Jesus called you, now go. Others might think you're insane. Just climb out of the boat.